break it down into two aspects. One is sort of operational, and the other one is strategic. Operationally, it's the hopes were obviously to improve efficiencies and make sure we keep track of all the documents we need and that we meet all of our regulatory requirements in a easy, verifiable way, so that we don't get tripped up in if and when the drug was approved that we didn't have the proper controls over the documentation. Strategically, there's sort of two aspects. One is to demonstrate to anybody who was doing diligence on the company that we were serious about moving forward with the option of selling the drug ourselves. And secondly, if as what happened when somebody bought the company, that we had our documentation as well organized as we could to facilitate due diligence and improve people's ability to analyze the value of the product and hopefully maximize the value of the product. Probably the full value of the company was pegged to that drug, and both in terms of whether we were going to, how we were going to go forward in the long term. It was going to it would be paving the way for any sort of future development of other drugs, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, it was really with the outside looking at the value of the company. That's what 100% of the value was, or almost 100% of the value was applied to. So making sure that we protected our best asset was a absolutely critical thing for us.
I joined Anormed back in April of 2006, and the title that I had for the position was Manager EDMS, Electronic Document Management System, and Validation, as in computer system validation.
What was the state of the project at the time that you arrived at Anormed?
Well, as far as the progress of the project went, they had just were finishing up what we refer to as operational qualification, which really deals with testing at a modular level, and they were essentially looking to move into the performance qualification phase, which is the equivalent of acceptance testing in general software circles. But they didn't necessarily have that expertise within the company to be defining their acceptance criteria and test cases and such, and that's what they were looking to me for. So in a sense, there was some relief that I came aboard to provide that knowledge. At the same time, I got a sense that the ESCOR personnel were happy to see me too, because my understanding was that they were overdue on the project already somewhat, and that they were looking to not only move it ahead, but also have somebody start looking at taking the reins from a project perspective.
Okay. Would you be able to describe what the atmosphere was like at Anormed at the time that you came in?
I think there was a sense of frustration on both sides, the vendor and the client, the Anormed side. From the Anormed side, they weren't necessarily seeing the progress that they were hoping for, and there was, I found that there were some clients or some users that weren't necessarily feeling that their needs were being met in the configuration of the product. On the vendor side, I believe ESCOR was getting somewhat frustrated too, because these delays were leading to overages. As a fixed cost project, any overages were costs that they were eating. And it was getting to be, I think it was getting to be a considerable sore point in that respect, though they never would let on to the client themselves.
Okay. How would you say you contributed to the project?
Well, my role was multifaceted. Essentially, I was providing the expertise from a computer system validation point of view, but from the company perspective. I also saw that there was value. I think that up until this point, it was really a vendor-led implementation project, which was not really a knock against ESCOR. I think they did a pretty decent job, actually. But what it meant, though, was that the company didn't necessarily have as much control of the project as they probably would have liked. And then I was also key in helping with the testing, defining test cases, protocols, writing all the documentation associated with that. Being in a pharmaceutical environment, there's quite a fair bit that you need to keep recorded to maintain compliance. Procedures, development of procedures, and this was also not only for the Escape product itself, but also within the ISIT environment that Anormed had, because it was still relatively immature from a compliance front. Educating people on what computer system validation entailed as far as on the client side. The vendor did have its computer system validation expertise, and they were good. It was just that the message wasn't getting all the way across to the client on that side of things. Did a lot of coordinating with the vendor, between vendor personnel and Anormed personnel. And also found that there was a subset of users that weren't necessarily getting their requirements met, and ended up enjoyed actually talking with them and understanding better what their requirements were and their needs were. What was really interesting to me was that I ended up moving more into a negotiating role, in a sense that I had to persuade some of the, later on in the later stages of the project, persuade some of these user groups to accept the system as is, knowing that they would get their requirements realized with a subsequent and immediate upgrade.
Okay. Would you be able to describe the period of time upon and immediately after the critical error that was experienced?
Yeah, this was quite a that was quite a day. It actually sticks out in my memory there. 2 days before our planned go live, unfortunately, given the history of the project, this was probably the 5th or 6th go live date that had come up in its entirety. But anyways, we had a go live date that we were ready to go with, and 2 days before, training was going on in the training room, and they had some 6+ students in there executing a workflow at the same time. All of a sudden, the system ground to a complete halt. Some investigation found that when you did a particular operation, initiated a workflow with 5 or more people simultaneously, you ended up with these heap dump files accumulating and taking up system resources until it eventually brought the system to its knees. Needless to say, everybody was perplexed. The vendor couldn't believe it either on their side, but otherwise, it was a difficult time.